أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان آمنت بالله صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallahu khairan, Brother Waqar. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam. As you know that this session is about Arab Spring, so I want to make sure that you guys are awake up before we talk about awakening. So let me offer you a community service. Please stand up for 30 seconds, do a stretch, inshallah. And I apologize as we are starting late, but inshallah, that will be good. Okay, that's enough. Thank you. That's okay. We are cutting now. So, in Surah Ra'd, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ بِقَوْمٍ مَا قَوْمٍ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not change the condition of a people until they change themselves, or until they change what is in themselves. So, as we go through this session, please keep this reminder in your mind. And about this session, I think all of you are aware of the fact that when it started off in Tunisia back in 2010, it was as a result of self-immolation of Mohammed Bouazizi. So, as a result, thousands of people, took out and went to the street and gave this strong message to the dictator that enough is enough. We cannot tolerate this injustice and oppression. So within a month, by January of 2011, President Zain al-Abidin was ousted. Ben Ali, famously known as Ben Ali. And then within few months, it provoked, or in the same month, it provoked the protests in Egypt as well. And by March and April, Hosni Mubarak in Egypt was gone as well. Egypt, as we know, is a very, very important place in the history of in the Islamic history. So, and at that time too, we all said that since it is the bellwether of the Middle East, so inshallah, whatever is happening in Egypt, inshallah, will have long-lasting effect in the whole region. But then, we saw many unfortunate things happen in Egypt. Just a few months ago, a democratically elected government was removed. And there are many complexities around this whole issue of Arab Spring. And in order to discuss those complexities, we have our esteemed guests with us who are going to discuss those issues with us. So first, I would like to invite Dr. Mohsin Ansari. Dr. Mohsin Ansari is a doctor by profession, and he is also the chairman of Board of Directors of ICNA Relief. So Dr. Mohsin Ansari.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. My dear brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. The topic we are going to discuss today, as briefly described, is very important, like many other topics. But something which is more than important is, this is a topic which touches lots of hearts. This is a topic which has brought tears in thousands of eyes. This is a topic which has created so much emotions. Something which happened thousands of miles away has created so much emotion. And day and night we see those emotions seen here on the streets of USA also. My part of the topic is to give you some background of the Arab Spring. Let me start with some explanation about the revolution. Can we have the slides, please? All right. The word revolution itself comes from the Greek word, Latin word, revolutio, which means turn around. Basically, it implies that fundamental change in the power or organizational structure that takes place in a relatively short period of time. Throughout the history, any revolution is a result of many events that completely change the nature of the society and its political life. The French Revolution is an example. Now talking about Arab Spring, I want to switch gears and come directly to what happened in the Middle East in 2010 and 2011. At the end of 2010 and beginning of 2011, a series of demonstrations and protests began in the Arab world. These protests later came to be known as Arab Spring, and someone also called them different names, including Arab Awakening. Because my role is to give you the causes and the background, why did all this happen? This revolution, the people coming on the streets and having a complete, long-lasting and major effect throughout the Arab world did not just happen with one incident. There was a long-standing history of a variety of reasons which caused this to happen. The first thing which many people have quoted is the whole demographic situation of Arabs. According to a UN developmental history study, the population of Arab more than doubled the whole Middle Eastern area, the area which we talk about, which was under the Arab Spring. More than doubled between 1975 and 2005 to a staggering 314 million individuals. You can imagine a country like Egypt where more than half of the population, more than 2/3 of the population actually, was under 30 years of age. So this whole Arab world has a situation which a lot of population, and majority of that population is under 30 years of age, so usually young individuals. And the Arab countries and the governments were not able to keep up with the increased number of individuals. There was an ongoing issue of unemployment. The protests that started in 2011 and could not have evolved into a mass phenomenon had it not been the widespread discontent and over unemployment and low living conditions. You can imagine the anger of university students who were forced to drive cabs in order to earn their living. You can also imagine the frustration and the anger and the despair of the families who could not bring food to the table for their kids. This is all because of unemployment. In my list, the third thing itself which caused this revolution to happen was the same old faces, the aging dictatorship of Arab countries. The economic situation could stabilize over the time under a competent and credible government, but it was not there in Arab countries. But by the end of the 20th century, the whole Arab world basically was under the dictatorship. You can imagine the Egyptian leader, Hosni Mubarak. He was in power for 31 long years. Ben Ali, who was the Tunisian president, he was in power for 24 years in 2011 when this whole revolution came. And the king of all, Mr. Gaddafi, he was in power for 42 long years. And remember, none of these leaders were ever elected by any election process in their countries. Yet, people were supposed to follow their dictatorial regime, and people were sick and tired to see these old faces who were not there, but they were tyrants, they were oppressors, and above all, they were corrupt. Corruption itself, as I mentioned, the whole Arab world witnessed most corrupt regimes, and I have given some examples here, that economic hardship can be tolerated. Many of us can say, okay, we can live with less amount of food if we have a good future in our eyes. If we see there is something, good times are coming, we will be okay. But that was not happening in Arab countries. You can see that in Egypt, new businesses would not be opened until and unless they have the collaboration with the governmental agencies. And at that point, the whole world knows that there were few most rich people in Egypt. Rest of the Egyptian population was living mere less than $2 a day of income. In Tunisia, it has been established and reported repeatedly that there was no agreement of any new business which could have been established without a kickback to Ben Ali family. So these are all the examples, and there are many, many more reported in literature where these Arab regimes were surely and purely corrupt. What happened, and I'm going to talk about the Abu Azizi incident later, once all this is started, the Arabs themselves find themselves in a position where they can have a national appeal, an appeal which attracted every corner of their society, an appeal which brought people together, an appeal which brought different ideologies together, an appeal which brought different sects together, an appeal which brought, in essence, different religions together. And that's what happened. The key to the mass appeal of Arab Spring was its universal message. And they all gathered on one point agenda. They did not talk about their differences. The Islamists and the secularists, the leftists and the rightists, the people poor and the rich, the old and the young, the male and the female, the Christians and the Muslims, all went together for one point agenda. And that one point agenda was that they wanted the fall of the old corrupt regimes. And it is also a very unique example. I don't think any revolution has seen this example in the past. That this was a revolution in each country without a leader. There was no known established leadership for any of these revolutions. The people came to streets because of the slogan, not because of the parties or people. And there were spontaneous protests all across the Middle Eastern countries. Another thing which really played a very major role, which is seventh in my list, is the role of social media. Social media first came in view when on the Facebook, the first demonstration was announced against Hosni Mubarak by an anonymous group of people. You can imagine if somebody is known to create a protest, establish a protest, or organize a protest against Hosni Mubarak, what would have been done to him? So there was an anonymous group of people who established this protest against Hosni Mubarak, who in a few days managed to attract tens and thousands of people for that particular protest. Hence, the social media proved a powerful mobilization tool that helped the activists to outwit the police. In a study which was published at the University of Washington, Philip Howard, he gave some numbers. And he said the week before Hosni Mubarak was ousted, the number of tweets on Twitter account, which used to average about 2,300 per day from Egypt, the week before, the tweets which were done in Egypt were more than 230,000 in a week. Hence, similarly, the videos showing the demonstrations went viral. The whole thing was seen throughout the world, live, all the time. The first 23 videos, again suggested in this study, hit 5.5 million views in a period of 2 to 3 weeks. You can imagine the strength, the power, and the utilization of the social media in this whole revolution. Nobody can deny the role of the mosques in this particular revolution. And this, I'm talking in general, whether it is Tunisia, whether it is Egypt, whether it is Libya, and to a certain extent Syria. And actually it happened in Bahrain also. The most iconic and best attended protest took place on Fridays, when Muslim believers used to gather for their Friday prayers. You can imagine, even the worst of the tyrants, even worst of the oppressors, like Hosni Mubarak, Ben Ali, they could have clamped down and closed universities. Yes, they could do it. They could have killed the people as they did before and after. But it was very hard for them to close the mosques. So every single Friday prayer, people used to gather and start these demonstrations. So Friday demonstrations actually played the most vital role in this whole campaign against these oppressors. And you can see all these pictures which I have posted here. They basically show the enormity of these protests on Friday prayers. Guess what? What you expect from them to do in response? They did exactly what they were supposed to do. They started using power and force, as they have always done, to oppress these protests and this uprising. They used firepower, they used military power, they used economic sanctions, all kinds of suppressive activities were used. But the attempts to put down the protests through the use of force backfired. And they backfired miserably. In Libya and Syria, it actually led to a civil war, which we still see in Syria. Now, among the factors which played a role, as we are talking about the background of this whole Arab revolution, you cannot ignore, nobody can ignore the reasons outside their countries, the international reasons. And I have quoted some here. One of the biggest reasons which caused dissatisfaction and unhappiness among the Arab world, particularly in Egypt, was the relationship of Egypt with Israel. And I'm going to quote one of the articles which was written by the famous Israeli journalist in his paper in 2011. He says that among of all the world's statesmen, the one closest to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak. This is what he said in his article in 2010. Egypt has also ensured Israel's stability and security. As a result of this, the author concludes in his article, were Israelis leaders given one wish, they might ask the Mubarak to be granted immortality. This is written in his article. Moreover, Egyptians always refused that Camp David agreement, which was done between Israel and Egypt for a long time. Written in an article in Guardian in 2011, they researched it and they found the people in the streets in Egypt, they were vocally chanting slogans and talking that Israel should come out of that agreement at Camp David. Moreover, the failure of the peace process between Palestine and Israel, the last aggression against Gaza by Israel in 2009, and against Lebanon in 2006, all that contributed to the resentment, anger, and the frustration among the Arab masses, particularly on the streets of Egypt. As you can see in this picture, the huge amount of crowds all across, one of the pictures here is from Tahrir Square, the other picture where all the sisters in millions or thousands there, it's from Bahrain. it produced a domino effect, a contagious effect. As soon as Bouazizi provided that spark in Tunisia, the whole Arab world literally ignited. And you can see the results. Within a month of downfall of Tunisian dictator in January 2011, the protests spread all across the Arab world. It was broadcast live on many channels, particularly Al Jazeera. The resignation of Hosni Mubarak, one of the most powerful Middle Eastern leaders, it basically broke the wall of the fear. The people thought, they started for the first time in their lives, that they can do something against these tyrants. Now, I'm going to give you the story which has been discussed a lot about the Bouazizi story in Tunisia. Obviously, as a Muslim, we all do not agree with the concept of suicide. What Bouazizi did, he was a fruit seller in a small town in Tunisia. At age 19, he decided he will give up, he will quit his studies in order to provide education for his 5 younger brothers and sisters. So he started a shop, a fruit seller shop. And he used to go there and sell fruits every day. For years, months and years, he was tortured, like many other shopkeepers in the area, by the government police. On that particular day, which was 18th of December 2010, he was selling his fruits. At that point, the police came and asked him that you do not have the license, so we are going to take away your stuff. He refused. He was in public, where everybody was like gathered to see what's going on, was slapped on the face by one of the police women. And then he was forced on the ground, and he was forced on the ground and taken away the stuff. He went to the public municipal corporation and asked for help, and he wanted to talk to somebody. As like all these countries, he was told, no, the boss is so busy, they cannot talk to a fruit seller like you. So frustrated, upset, he put petrol on himself and killed himself. As mentioned by his mother later, that he killed himself not because of poverty. He killed himself because of the humiliation he faced in front of everybody. This basically ignited. Next day, it was in news, and the whole Tunisia literally stood up for him because of that. But I gave you all those 11 reasons. This would have never happened if those 11 reasons would have not been there. Hence, the whole thing started. As Suhail Ghannouchi, the leader of Islamic Party Al-Nahda in Tunisia, mentioned, that Tunisia was basically, the government was a mix of political authority and mafia. They were literally mafias who were ruling Tunisia. You can see dozens of Nahda workers were killed, 30,000 were imprisoned, 1,000 exiled, and Ghannouchi himself was tortured and was sentenced to life in prison 3 times. Eventually, he was allowed to go for exile in UK. Remember, ironically, and I have written here, when he was trying to find an exile, a place to live, all these Arab rulers refused him to come to their countries. And I'm going to name specifically Saudi Arabia, who refused Suhail Ghannouchi, the leader of the Islamic Party, to come in exile in Saudi Arabia. At the same time, this same Saudi Arabia provided the safe home and the luxurious palace to Bin Ali, the dictator who ran away. And now I'm going to talk about what happened in Egypt for a few minutes. Muslim Brotherhood is the Arab world's most prominent Islamist group. They, over the years, as I have been told, I have less time, so I'm going to go it fast. Brotherhood, over the years, since its inception in the 1930s, have provided exceptional social services. And their role as a social service organization has actually shown the whole world the true face of Islamic work. Both in Egypt and Tunisia, they have fought for democracy and they have taken part in elections. It is very well known that the group operates hospitals, schools, and programs to support widows and orphans across Egypt. And over the years, as Egypt's public services scheme has deteriorated, Muslim Brotherhood has played an increasingly central role as an alternative provider of services. In her book, Dreams and Shadows, Robin Wright, she's a famous writer, describes 2006 visit to a hospital in Egypt, where she says that she went to that hospital and found every single subspecialty doctor providing services to people. And on the door of Muslim Brotherhood Hospital, which was the main hospital providing the care, says that we provide this service to please our Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, same slogan which we use here in this country when we work for ICNA relief. And the skills of Brotherhood showed more power, more strength when they entered in the protest in Tahrir Square. Fast forward, this whole happened. Hosni Mubarak was jailed and elections happened. You can see the celebrations with these sisters. Muslim Brotherhood won the elections in Arab countries. Actually, not only Muslim Brotherhood won elections in Egypt, the Arab Spring gave unprecedented boost to moderate Islamic parties in Egypt, in Tunisia, and Morocco. What happened after that, and I think Sheikh Omar Suleiman will talk about that more. What I wrote here is 1 step forward and 2 steps backwards. Somehow, the Western world, remaining Arab dictators and the secular elements, they did not accept this clear-cut victory of Islamic parties in this region. In Egypt, the long-standing corrupt elements and military used the non-acceptance of secular elements as an opportunity. Hence, the first ever democratically elected president and the parliament was thrown away within 1 year of his presidency by the powerful army of Egypt. Thousands of Muslimhood brothers, sisters, and their workers were tortured, massacred, killed during the Fajr prayer in Masjid Arabia. As a result, the Arab Spring, we don't know where we are. It is an uncertain future. And one of the last slides I have, you can see that in Egypt, the party who won 5 consecutive elections within 1 year, ranging from 51% to 77% of popularity, was thrown away from the power by the might of the military and with the financial support of Arab rulers. Now, the picture I have here, look at this picture. These are teenage girls who were just 3 days back were imprisoned and given jail sentences of 11 years or more because they were demonstrating against the Arab regime. And what was the charge on them? Can you believe this? The charge on these 20 teenage girls was that they were disrupting the traffic, and they were given 11 years prison. So the dream of Arab Spring turning into a true democracy is still very distant and far. But the last thing, and my last slide, is the ayah from Quran. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Yuriduna liyutfi'u Allahu nurallahi biafwahihim wallahu mutimmu nurihi وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. They seek to extinguish Allah's light by blowing with their mouths, but Allah shall spread His light in the fullness. However, the unbelievers may abhor this. Jazakallah khair wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Jazakallahu khairan, Dr. Mohsin, for your presentation and speech. Indeed, it was very good. So as Dr. Mohsin mentioned, that the future is not predictable, and it is very complex because of many factors that are playing over there. So we need more than the linear explanations, and nobody can do that better than our next speaker, Dr. Ovamir Anjum. Dr. Ovamir Anjum is Imam Khattab Endowed Chair of Islamic Studies and Associate Professor in Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies in University of Toledo, Ohio. He's the author of the book as well, Politics, Law, and Community in Islamic Thought, the Thamian Moment. With that, I invite Dr. Ovamir Anjum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah wa alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that presentation, Dr. Mohsin. That made my job much simpler. Let me first begin by talking about why should I care? Why should we care as American Muslims? Why should we care as citizens of the United States, many of us? Why should we care about as citizens of the world? And why should we care first and foremost as members of the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the bearers of the message of Islam and its exemplars? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Man la yahtamu bi amri al-muslimina falaysa minhum." Whoever does not care, or man asbaha la yahtam bi amri al-muslimin, another tradition, whoever gets to a point that he or she no longer cares about the matter of Muslims cannot be part of them. And there are many ways you will see that these events will shape and continue to shape the future of the world. In fact, folks here on the Occupy Wall Street, in the Occupy Wall Street movement in the US were inspired by what the young people in Egypt, in Tunisia, and elsewhere had done. The odds were so tremendously high that it was nothing short of a miracle. I was personally involved in the Middle East and Egypt as somebody who cared very deeply and studied it for for some time. And my area of study is pre-modern Islamic political thought, but I'm very interested and I've studied Islamic movements. And when I visited Egypt 10 years before then, about 2001, and then once later, I would almost cry out of frustration and anger. Why is it that these people don't do anything about it? So it was very personal for me. If you looked at the humiliation, if you looked at the fear, if you looked at how people lived, and these were wonderful people, and I know only Egypt, but I know more intimately, but I know other places from the wonderful opportunity we have for the Muslim Ummah, and I want to dwell on it a little bit. In the United States, in the West, when you diaspora communities from all over the Muslim world who have, unfortunately, their best of their sons and daughters have been thrown out, and many of them are here. And so it's an invitation for us to learn from each other, to turn to each other, to teach each other, and learn from each other of what is happening in your country, why is it, things are the way they are. And this is why I knew the rest of the Arab world, because I had some of my dearest friends from these countries. And in part of my scholarship and part of my student years, that's what gave me energy and hope and and reasons to go on and study is to talk to these wonderful people. Now, was it a revolution? How shall we name this thing that's been called Arab Spring? It was called Arab Spring by the American media and was then picked up, but many activists in the Arab world object to it, so I only call it, one shall say very conservatively or scientifically, is uprisings. These were uprisings. We do not know if it was a revolution yet. Spring, we don't know what that means, but we do know that it was uprising. So I call it Arab uprisings of 2011, and then the counter uprising, the counter protest, and the coup d'etat of 2013. Who started it? As we learned, the young people had a lot to do with it, but if you look at the history of countries like Tunisia and Egypt, for a few decades, the Islamist movements, the Muslim Brotherhood, had been the strongest opposition and the largest in terms of population and popular appeal, and the largest in terms of their welfare systems. They had been the largest groups. But they were not at the forefront. Why were they not at the forefront? Because they knew that if they are at the forefront, if they do anything like that, they would be shot with no mercy whatsoever. So the revolutions actually, or the uprisings, were started and organized by young people, and we do not know, to be honest, who these young people were. There are some reports that some of these young people were being trained, and I do not mean it in a conspiratorial way, but there were young people who had come to the United States and gone to Eastern Europe to learn methods of organization. So there may have been some planning, because the way they started from a very organized, in a very organized way from specific points, and had a one-point agenda. None of this usually happens without some kind of pre-planning. And as our brother pointed out, it was a one-point agenda. Irhal, get out, nothing else. Whereas if you look at the Occupy Wall Street movement in the United States, and the reasons for people to rise up in the United States are also very, very intense, very deep. There are many serious problems. But if you look at, there are about 100,000 items on the agenda of Occupy Wall Street. Not so in the Arab Spring, not so in Tunisia and Egypt for some reason. So there is something one could say that there was a reason. It was orchestrated in a way that it sounded at first young people, the kind of people that would be very bad in the media if the Hosni Mubarak forces went and fired on. This would not have been the case if it were the bearded men or Ikhwan or the Salafis at the forefront. So there is something to be said about that. We do not fully understand why exactly and how is it that it started. What did it demand? Its demand was one thing that was very significant about it, that it was very clear demand. These people who had been living under dictators for 20, 30 years stood up and said one thing. And they said it in a way that was completely nonviolent. So nonviolent protests, that are nonviolent organized protests, had such an effect, such a power, that is something to be said, and there's something to be learned about even in such draconian countries as Egypt and Tunisia and Syria. There is a power in protest, in the opinion of people when properly demonstrated. Were these people Islamists or secularists? For the most part, they were neither Islamists, that is the first wave, nor were they secularists, in the sense that they wanted to bring together concerns for injustice, unemployment, injustice, humiliation, torture, corruption, all of these things that all decent people, in fact Muslims and non-Muslims, could identify with. However, from the very beginning of these protests, my big concern was that they do not have a leadership. And when a group does not have a leadership, it's the easiest thing to manipulate them. And I think that's exactly what ended up happening. They did not have a leadership, so they were very good at criticizing and being angry, but when it came to providing alternatives, they were all over the place as expected. One of the biggest debates that was going on in the various circles that were discussing the issue is how does one respond to these, because you don't know who these people really are and where are they going to go with it. Many of them are young kids, what I call them Facebooked young kids, who aren't very deeply attached either to the Egyptian traditions or Islam or anything else. They are people who are in some ways very, one could say, they are young people. And while young people are our best hope, but when disconnected from their own traditions, which I argue that they were, they can be easily led to believe and to say and to do things that may go against their long-term interests. So this was my fear. Now, which is not to say that rising up in protests against such dictatorships was anything but heroic. In fact, regardless of the actual political developments, that the psychological impact of these uprisings has been so tremendous that it has destroyed the fear that had been built up, that had been accreting layers after layers of fear and self-hatred almost, and this humiliation for the last 50 years or so among the Arab masses. Many people argued at that time, I remember among the academia, that the Arabs are really dead. There isn't anything that they cannot take anymore. I had hope, but not in my wildest dreams could I imagine that these people would come together and be rise up like this. We don't fully understand what was going on behind the doors. What was the relationship between the army and the internal state, or the deep state, that is a security apparatus, as you'll see in countries like Egypt, Tunisia, and Syria. The army is one thing and security apparatus is another. Security apparatus has been built up by these dictators as much more directly related to the president, a certain elite, and then there is a military. And often in a country like Syria, for example, the security apparatus was much bigger than the military itself, and the same is true in some ways in Tunisia. And what we saw was that the military stood on the sidelines and did not intervene very much. Part of the reason, scholars say, is that they actually wanted Hosni Mubarak to go because they thought he was getting old and it was time for change anyway, and that when he's creating so much trouble, you can get a new face. Ultimately, as we saw, they succeeded in doing precisely that. However, I have complete hope and trust that we have lost a battle, but we have moved toward winning a war. And I think that it's not going to be an easy one. Seeds of corruption and destruction that are sowed over 50 years can't be uprooted so quickly, but nonetheless, in the way people stand up to injustice, including these young sisters that we saw in the slide, may Allah protect them and may Allah bless them. May Allah make each one of them a symbol of what believing men and believing women especially can do in rooting out injustice and corruption. Now, what was the nature of the problem? I want to talk about that, and then I will turn to the current situation. What was the nature of the problem? And this is where I think we need to think most, and we need to understand most, and we need to work at most. Was the problem that a few Arab dictators were corrupt? If you are interested in understanding history systematically, if you're a social scientist, a political scientist, if you have a mind that wants to ask questions, you will have to ask, why were all these dictators in place? Why were they in place for so long? What had happened in the past? What made it possible for these dictators to stay? And what were they doing? Are these tactics, are these things unique? In other words, are these only happening in the Middle East? And to all of these questions, I think we get an answer that we might not at first sight expect. One, the problems of deep division between haves and have-nots goes way back in these countries, at least, and they got significantly worse since 1979, 1980, with what we call neoliberalization or neoliberalist programs of President Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, in which they forced third world countries to remove tariffs, meaning that it's economically you could not safeguard your borders by saying that our production will stay in our countries, but rather your local merchants and producers and factories must compete against global corporations, which means you are bound to lose in a third world country where you cannot produce the kind of goods that can compete against foreign markets. Somewhere people in China, somewhere else, they're being worked nearly slave labor using global capital. The markets open up, and so neoliberalism, and I hope that many of you, especially the young people, learn that word, look it up, and try to understand why these things are not accidental. This oppression, systematic oppression, not only in the Middle East, by the way, but in Africa, Latin America, much of the world, Muslim or non-Muslim, is suffering from policies of global organizations, global capitalism, whether it's through IMF or World Bank, or particular plans and specific policies during the Cold War and now post-Cold War by the world powers, the United States first of them. There is, for instance, in every single Middle Eastern country today, last 50 years, the United States has either sponsored a direct coup, some kind of a military coup. This is true in most countries in Latin America. So the United States, during the Cold War and post-Cold War, has been involved in toppling regimes that could have taken these countries in a very different direction. 1953, in Iran, we know this most famous case when elected Prime Minister Mossadegh was toppled by the CIA upon the request of the British oil companies because Mossadegh had nationalized Iranian oil. The same exercise was repeated in Iraq in 1960s and 1963, 1969. CIA tried, and guess what was the name of the guy the CIA hired to assassinate the prime minister and to stage the coup? Saddam Hussein. 1969, they actually succeeded. The same is true in Lebanon, where there was an oil pipeline that passed, in Syria. So why these countries have dictators? For very simple reason, because they have oil and because they happen to be what called late developers, they happen to be on the periphery of world's market, they are producers of raw materials, they cannot have their own will. Now, if suppose there were democracy in many of these countries, the kinds of deals that oil companies in the world and the big corporations get, they will never be able to get. If you go to Mecca today and you turn around, you will see the big golden arch, McDonald's. You will see all these symbols bigger than the Kaaba. This would not be possible if these people, if Muslims are allowed to think on their own and vote democratically. So there are many other interests that make it possible for these large forces, and that's partly why I think that Muslim Brotherhood, who certainly are the largest democratic force, and certainly people who are against capitalism, they were not ready to rule. And in a way, I think that it's a blessing maybe from Allah, or tamhis min Allah Azza wa Jal. It is a purification from Allah, and a second time, more time to think, so that they could work on these things, because when they were in power, for the year that Morsi was in power, he actually followed policies that were not terribly different. I mean, they were different in politics, but when it came to economy, they were not systematically different from what was being done before him. And that was very dangerous, in my opinion, because you see, once you get, for example, he accepted that large loan from the IMF, and once one gets into that direction, one loses political freedom. So in the words of Thomas Friedman of New York Times, who is this prophet of this neoliberal neoliberal regime, if you will, who he talks about, he says, look, this is what happens when countries enter into this capitalistic markets. Two things happen. One, politics becomes small. Number two, economy becomes big. What he means by that, you basically get a golden straitjacket, meaning that you are going to get some money, but here's how your country is going to work. And there is very little actual freedom on the policies that you could follow. So this is precisely has been happening in these countries for the last 40 years. And I invite some of those, especially those who are curious about this stuff, young people in particular, to take this stuff seriously, to study it, to study history of the Muslim world, history of what is going on right now, so that you could have not only measured opinion about the world, though you could be passionate about the great injustices that are going on all around the world, so that you can talk to people. Even here, I mean, I was on my plane to here. I was sitting next to a Chinese atheist engineer who works in oil and gas company here, and he said, I don't know why there are so many problems in the Middle East. Why do religions don't get along? After 5 minutes, we were talking about the real problems of the world. I explained in 5 minutes. Look, before 1980s, did anybody ever talk about Islamic terrorism? It wasn't on the horizon. Why did it happen in 1980s, right? And after a little while, we were talking about the great problems of the world. They were talking about the problems caused by corporations, what's happening in China, the exploitation of labor in China. But my point is that if you know this stuff, you can get somebody as far away from you as an atheist, a Chinese atheist, who shares very little with you, but as a human being, he or she is worried about the same problem. So you can make Islam relevant in 5 minutes if you know this stuff. So there is every reason for us to learn. Now, going back to the Middle East, we are in a situation today where, as I said, we have lost a battle, but I think that we are moving toward a war that we could still win. And if it's not a matter of one regime changing and another one coming, if they do not change fundamental policies. And those policies, what are they going to do if they move away from this global tyranny? That you have to have alternatives. And how do you create those alternatives? Who is going to create and work on those alternatives? It's going to be our young people. And if you do not bring your concern with Islam, your concern for the truth, your concern into this building of the future, you're going to be just as much outside of the future as we have been of the past in the last couple of centuries. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us His soldiers in a better world for humanity and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make Islam something that people look up to as a beam of light in this world where there is a lot of tyranny, a lot of injustice. But more than that, we believe that there is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is watching. اعلموا أن الله يحيي الأرض بعد موتها. Know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives life to earth after its death. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakallahu khairan, Dr. Ovamir, for the thoughtful discourse on the events that are taking place in the Middle East. So, dear brothers and sisters, in the midst of revolutionary enthusiasm that had overtaken all of us in 2011, 2012, and now as well, there was an intellectual by the name of Dr. Tariq Ramadan, who was skeptical of these events that were transpiring in the Middle East in general and were changing the political landscape of Egypt and Tunisia and other countries. He said it famously that, when people used to say that, oh, see, the army has not returned to politics in the Egyptian context. So he said that the army has not returned to politics because of the simple reason that it has never left the politics. So anyhow, these were the political explanations, and I thank Dr. Mohsin and Dr. Ovamir to enlighten us with their talks. Now, from the spiritual angle, Sheikh Omar Suleiman, he's not a doctor yet, Sheikh Omar Suleiman, inshallah, will shed light on the events. He needs no introduction, and he doesn't like introduction, but I would like to say that he is, mashallah, a very gifted scholar. He is a director of Islamic Learning Foundation as well, and member of General Assembly, ICNA, Islamic Circle of North America, Dr. Sheikh Omar Suleiman. Sorry.
Brother Ajaz keeps rubbing it in. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, I know you already did this in the beginning of the session, but please stand up once more, inshallah, because some of you are way too relaxed. All right, and please be seated. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين والعاقبة للمتقين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على عبدك ورسولك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. I'm going to warn you all from now, I'm going to offend a few people, because when I speak about politics I offend people because I have very strong views on the political situation in the Muslim world, and I do think that in the spirit of honest dialogue and trying to find solutions, particularly the students of knowledge and the ulama should speak their minds in a civilized manner, so that we can arrive at certain conclusions, inshallah ta'ala. But I'd like to, because I have very limited time, I'd like to touch on the spiritual elements and how they apply to us, because it's one thing to just look at the Arab world and to say, well, this is what happened, and that, Dr. Mohsin and Dr. Ovamir did a very good job of that. And at the same time, all of us need to understand that we have a role to play. And what applies to the Arab world, by and large, applies to the entire Muslim world. You can compare. And what I would propose is that the situation in Egypt is almost identical to the situation in Bangladesh. Okay? So what applies to the Arab world applies to the Muslim world by and large. And whenever we're talking about these things, what I'd like to touch on is something that I found very, very important, and that was actually some work that was written by Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam rahimahullah ta'ala, when he talked about asbab al-hazima, the reasons for defeat, the reasons why the Muslims become humiliated. And the first thing that he said was not understanding where victory comes from, not having proper tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's almost looked down upon in these discussions of politics when someone says we should make dua. Like, yeah, we know that, but what else should we be doing? And I understand that some people take it too far, where they completely ignore the political realm and the asbab and the means to political change. But at the same time, this is by and large, the most important aspect of victory, is whether or not we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawfiq, whether or not we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hand with us, or whether we are left alone to ourselves. Al-khudlan, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls it, being left alone. And subhanAllah, I want to start off this discussion. We just passed through Ashura. And one thing that really disturbed me about this Ashura, and although each and every single religion and each and every single sect and each and every single group has a right to their narrative and has a right to their interpretations and their explanations, was that at least the reason why Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah fasts Ashura, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave victory to Musa alayhi salam over Fir'aun, was almost neglected around around the country in terms of khutbahs and in terms of Facebook statuses and lectures and seminars. The entire discussion surrounded the massacre of the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, our beloved Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Almost the entire discussion. And there is a connection between those two. There's definitely a connection between those two. But I think the narrative of Musa alayhi salam and the original reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam commanded us to fast that day, نَحْنُ أَوْلَى بِمُوسَى مِنْكُمْ, we are closer to Musa than anyone else, was completely neglected. And you know what the connection between the two is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave victory to Musa alayhi salam in the most improbable circumstances. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave victory to a people that lived many years under oppression. And whenever victory was given to them under Musa alayhi salam, under their prophet Musa alayhi salam, because of their lusts and because of their desires, they turned on the one who gave them, or to whom, or through whom victory was given to them. ذَلِكَ بِمَا عَصَوْا وَكَانُوا يَعْتَدُونَ. They turned to killing their prophets, and they turned to doing away with the authority that was placed on them, the authority that saved them from oppression in the first place. And this is what we see happening over 1,000 years later, in the time of Al-Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhu, where the grandson of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where the ummah reaches a low to an extent that there were people in this ummah that would massacre the grandson of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there's definitely a transition there. But the original reason, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave victory to Musa alayhi salam over Fir'aun. And you know, I'd like to start this discussion with something that many Muslims don't know about. And that is why Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu removed Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu ta'ala anhu from leading the army, from leading the Muslim troops all over the world, when Khalid radiallahu anhu was at his peak and did absolutely nothing to lose that position. And again, because of our ignorance sometimes of Islamic text, and because we take our narratives of our deen from movies and TV shows and all kinds of places, and we just hear what we hear, you know, there's this misconception that Umar radiallahu anhu removed Khalid radiallahu anhu because Umar had a problem with Khalid. There was a personal rivalry between Umar and Khalid, and that's why Umar decided to remove Khalid as soon as he became the Khalifa. And that is the most untrue statement that you could make about that entire incident. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu notices something. Khalid radiallahu anhu won over 100 battles in his lifetime, which is phenomenal. He's never lost a battle. Khalid radiallahu ta'ala anhu was that person that as long as the Muslims saw Khalid, they said, we're good, we're straight. Khalid is with us, we're not going to lose. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called him Sayfullah, the sword of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And people became so dependent upon Khalid radiallahu ta'ala anhu that some people, you know, at that point, when a person reaches that level, when a person reaches that status, then you have all of these tales and all of these stories that start to be told. Someone even walked up to Khalid radiallahu anhu one time and told him, is it true that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent your sword down to you? You know, Sayfullah, that the sword of Allah actually came down to you? Like that actually became a thought that, you know, this is so divine that Allah sent down the sword of Khalid. That's why he never loses. And it became all about Khalid radiallahu anhu. As long as Khalid is with us, we cannot lose. And Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu did not like that. Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu saw that the corruption of creed, the corruption of theology, the corruption of understanding was so dangerous that it was worth risking, and I use risking in quotation marks because it was not truly a risk, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was still with the Muslims. But it was worth risking victory for the believers at a very critical time in order to remove that corruption of understanding and that corruption of creed. So Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, while the Muslims are in the middle of a battle, sends a letter to Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah radiallahu anhu, as far as status is concerned, is greater than Khalid. Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah is from the Ashar Mubashirin, he's from the 10 promised paradise. Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he passed away, he said, if Abu Ubaidah was alive, I would have just appointed him to be Khalifa. I wouldn't have even thought about it. I wouldn't have given it a second thought. But Abu Ubaidah passed away before Umar ibn al-Khattab. May Allah be pleased with him. But Abu Ubaidah, although he had that status, in terms of being from the 10 promised paradise and other virtues that the Prophet ﷺ assigned to him, was not as at the level of Khalid radiallahu ta'ala anhu when it came to war. But Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu sends a letter to Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah and to Khalid ibn al-Walid that he is removing Khalid and he is replacing him with Abu Ubaidah. Some people say again, that's because Umar didn't like Khalid, they had an issue, they had a dispute, and that's why. But Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu himself explains what he did. Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu wrote to Abu Ubaidah, and he said, Wallahi, lam a'zil Khalidan an sakhtatin wala khiyana. He said, I swear by Allah, I did not remove. So are you going to tell me Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu is making things up? He said, Wallahi, I did not remove Khalid because of any issue with him or because of betrayal. He said, وَلَكِنِّي خَشِيتُ أَن يُفْتَنَ الْمُسْلِمُونَ بِهِ. But I was afraid that the Muslims would be tested with him. فَيُوكِلُونَ إِلَيْهِ. That's the most powerful part of this statement. And so Allah would entrust the Muslims to Khalid radiallahu anhu. Look at what Umar radiallahu anhu is saying. If the Muslims start believing that victory comes from Khalid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might remove his victory. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might remove his help, his nusrah, and entrust the Muslims to Khalid radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And if that happens, it doesn't matter how great of a general Khalid is radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the Muslims will be defeated. That was the understanding of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, the one who the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that there were people in the the nations that came before, that were muhaddathun, that were spoken to, divinely inspired. Although they were not prophets, they were spoken to by the angels. In my ummah, it's Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He understood it. He got it. I don't want people to think it's from Khalid radiallahu anhu. It's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when the people depend too much on al-asbab, when they start to rely on the means, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removes his tawfiq and the Muslims are defeated. So Khalid radiallahu ta'ala anhu was replaced. And dear brothers and sisters, understanding where victory comes from is something that's very crucial. Not just as a community, not just as an ummah, but even in our own individual lives. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts us in difficult situations until we figure it out. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us victory in the most improbable circumstances, and at the same time allows the Muslim ummah to be defeated whenever it's at its strongest, so that people can understand where it comes from. Never belittle dua. Never belittle at-tawakkul ala Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ. If you turn away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring about another nation. ثُمَّ لَا يَكُونُوا أَمْثَالَكُمْ. And they won't be like you. Now, some of the Muslims were afraid. Some of the Sahaba, they said, does that mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do away with this ummah as a whole and bring about another ummah? And the Prophet ﷺ, whenever he was asked, he put his hand on Salman al-Farisi radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Salman the Persian, a man who was the son of the God maker of the Zoroastrian faith, the fire kindler of those who worshipped fire, who came all the way from Persia after making hijrah all over the world, trying to find truth and guidance, and was with the Prophet ﷺ. And Rasulullah ﷺ said, this ayah is talking about Salman and his offspring. If the Arabs turn away from it, the Persians will be given it. And if the Persians turn away, then the Indians will be given it. And if the Indians turn away, then the Africans will be given it. It doesn't matter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't depend upon any race. And you know what? When this ummah becomes nationalistic, then we start to fall. And look at the irony of this. And this is really going to upset some people. And I apologize in advance if I upset you. And if I do upset you, come talk to me afterwards, inshallah ta'ala, so that you can leave without anything in your heart against me. Isn't it ironic that even though the British colonized the Middle East and assigned to us these flags, we kill each other and claim pride over these flags? Don't you realize they look almost identical? Who created Israel in the first place? And you're raising a flag that was brought by the same people that colonized your land and saying this is where victory comes from and I would die for this flag? And subhanAllah, this is a great disease in the ummah, and this is the second one of asbab al-hazima that Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam gives, and I'll include it in this category, which is that people start to say, and I remember, and you know what, I don't regret anything I said about Egypt or Syria in the past. I don't. And the answer is, you're not even Egyptian. You're not even Syrian. Why do you care? Why are you talking about our cause? You're not even this. You're not even that. You're not even this. You're not even that. How pitiful is that and pathetic when Muslims talk that way? And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man da'a ila al-asabiyya falaysa minna." Whoever calls to nationalism and tribalism is not one of us. He's not one of us. All of us speak about and are concerned with the Muslim affairs, or else we're not of the Muslims. We're not from them if we don't care. And subhanAllah, I remember when I was reading, one time it just struck me as I was reading through the history of Salah ad-Din, rahimahullah ta'ala, and I talked a lot about Salah ad-Din yesterday, because Salah ad-Din needs to be studied, not just with his sword, not just by watching Kingdom of Heaven, which is not the most accurate portrayal of Salah ad-Din, all right? He needs to be studied. The letter writing campaign of Salah ad-Din. When he goes through on the hills of Hittin and he sees that the people are not up, that their tents are dark at the time of Salat al-Fajr, and says, this is when we're defeated. Salah ad-Din, that great warrior, understood that when we're not up praying Salat al-Fajr and praying Qiyamul Layl, Allah's not going to give us victory. And when he sees them up at night praying, he says, now it comes. You know what the last words of Salah ad-Din were? Does anyone know? Anybody? Allah, it makes, subhanAllah, it shows you his ikhlas, his sincerity. His last words were, Huwa Allahu alladhi la ilaha illahu al-malikul quddus. He is Allah. There is no God besides him, al-Malik, the king. He never forgot where it came from. And you know what, dear brothers and sisters, Salah ad-Din wasn't even Arabi. He wasn't even an Arab. He was Kurdish. The Palestinian cause was never an Arab cause. When it becomes an Arab cause, it fails. The Ottomans were not Arabs. Ad-Dawla al-Uthmaniyya was not an Arab cause. It never was an Arab cause. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu did not open Palestine as an Arab. He opened it as the Khalifa of the Muslims. It was never an Arab cause. When it becomes an Arab cause, it fails just like every other cause in the Muslim world. When Pakistan becomes a Pakistani cause, it fails just like every other cause in the Muslim world. And that misguided nationalism and tribalism is shaitan. That is the attitude of the devil himself. وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَكُونُوا أَمْثَالَكُمْ. And you know what the Prophet ﷺ also said? Let's say that there are no Muslims to even take care of it. There are no Arabs, there are no Persians, there's no one to take care of this cause. Rasulullah ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَيُؤَيِّدُ هَذَا الدِّينَ بِالرَّجُلِ الْفَاجِرِ. It's an authentic hadith. Allah would give victory to this deen even if He used a wicked man to do it. That man wouldn't even know that he's being used to give victory to the deen, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives victory to the deen through him. And subhanAllah, throughout history we see this. People that tried, يُرِيدُونَ لِيُطْفِئُوا نُورَ اللَّهِ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ وَاللَّهُ مُتِمُّ نُورِهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. People that tried to shut down this awakening, shut down this movement, and because of the venom that they were spewing out of their mouth, the only thing they achieved was that they riled the Muslims up and they made the Muslims realize what was being done to them, and the Muslims stood up. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, using that person's tongue, actually achieved more than what would have been achieved on the manbar by a sheikh. Inna Allah la yu'ayyidu hadha din bil rajul al-fajir. Allah doesn't need anyone. In fact, Allah doesn't even need human beings. What about when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected the Kaaba from Abraha and his elephants? أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used birds. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ جُنُودَ رَبِّكَ إِلَّا هُ. No one knows the soldiers of your Lord except for Him. Allah doesn't need people. And this is something that the Sahaba even had to learn in the Battle of Badr. In the Battle of Badr, they didn't win that battle. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent malaika. Allah sent angels to win that battle. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent angels to fight with them because they knew when they went forward, this is only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They knew that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives victory. They didn't think for a moment that we're outnumbered. And you know how intimidating it is if you don't even have any horses and the other side has more horses than soldiers and they have wine and liquor bottles so that they can party over your corpses? And these people didn't care. SubhanAllah, they knew. Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he says that on the day of Badr, I was standing and I looked to my right and my left and I saw two kids, two young men. And I looked at them and I was like, man, I'm in trouble. You know, these are the two people next to me. It was wow, these little two young guys next to me. And they were called the two Mu'ads. And he said they tapped on his shoulder and they said, Ammo. They even called him uncle. He said uncle. And Abdurrahman ibn Auf wasn't that old. They said, which one of those guys is Abu Jahl? Are you serious? Abu Jahl was the size of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. Which one of those guys is Abu Jahl? You guys want to know where Abu Jahl is? And they said, our mom told us not to come home until we kill him. SubhanAllah. And you know what? Abdurrahman ibn Auf said, I was confident after seeing their confidence. And subhanAllah, those two men were the two men that would gash Abu Jahl coming from both sides. And then Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu was a dwarf in physical stature, but a giant in the eyes of Allah, in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was the one who would finish him off. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when the Muslims finally became big and they finally had an army, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and the day of Hunayn, إِذْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ كَثْرَتُكُمْ. Remember the day of Hunayn, the battle of Hunayn, when you were impressed by your own numbers. Like, look, we got this covered. We were able to win with a few hundred against 1,000. And now we're a bigger army. إِذْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ كَثْرَتُكُمْ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, it did no good for you whatsoever. This is part of our creed. This is part of our aqeedah, to understand that victory comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, even in our individual lives, you know, subhanAllah, we look at Nuh alayhi salam, and this is where we really find out a lot about ourselves. When Nuh alayhi salam was leaving, and he calls upon his son, Ya bunay yarkab ma'ana wa la takum ma'al kafirin. Oh my son, ride with us and do not be with the disbelievers. What did his son call out to him? He said, Sa'awi ila jabalin ya'asimuni min al-ma'. He said, oh my father, I'm going to stick on this mountain so it can protect me from the water. And subhanAllah, compare that to Musa alayhi salam. He was drowned. And Musa alayhi salam was drowned although he was standing on a mountain. Whereas Musa alayhi salam was placed in the Nile as a baby and ended up where? In the palace of Fir'aun, whom he would defeat by splitting the Red Sea. This is part of our creed. This is part of our theology. This is part of our understanding. This is who we are. The second thing that Al-Izz ibn Abd Salam rahimahullah said, we mentioned at-ta'assub, we mentioned nationalism and tribalism, and let's face it, you know, and I think a lack of accountability also comes under this category. A lot of times as Muslims, we like to blame outside parties and we fail to take accountability. If all external influences left the Muslim world right now, I guarantee you there would be just as much of a bloodbath as there is already going on over there. There would be bloodbath between qaba'il, between tribes. There would be bloodbaths between countries. And if you want to see what's happened in the history of the Muslims, if you want to see what Muslims are capable of doing to other Muslims in this day and age, when we're dominated by greed and wealth, then you can look at the Palestinian territories between 1993 and 2001. I will never ever forget watching a documentary, and it was done in 1996 on the Palestinian territories. And I remember watching this. And I remember, subhanAllah, growing up and I would ask my parents, you know, how come Palestine is not on the map? Where is our country? And I really didn't know any better. And then this was the first exposure that I got to understanding Palestine, what was going on in Palestine. And I'll never forget, as they were talking about the torture that people were going through under the Palestinian Authority, and a man runs up at the camera and he says, Dakhil Allah raj'ul Yahud. Said, by Allah, just bring back the Jews to govern us. They would do less to us than we do to ourselves. So let's not, as a Muslim ummah, we have to take accountability. Each and every single one of us has to take accountability, and we have to understand that we cannot always blame. Yes, there is no doubt, as Dr. Ovamir talked about, there is no doubt that even our very own government, we have to speak against those policies without any hesitation. We have to organize political action campaigns. There is no doubt that the United States of America has supported military coups all over the Muslim world, has supported all types of turnovers, all types of revolutions for the sake of its interests. And it makes no secret about it. Mutual interests. It makes no secret about why it's involved in Syria or why it's involved in Egypt or any of those types of things. There's no doubt about it. But as Muslims, we have to take accountability for ourselves at the same time. The other thing is al-dhulm, transgression. If there's transgression amongst the Muslims, Al-Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَيُقِيمَ الدَّوْلَةَ الْعَادِلَةَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will establish a just state, وَإِن كَانَتْ كَافِرَةً, even if it's a disbelieving nation. وَيَهْدِمُ الدَّوْلَةَ الظَّالِمَةَ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will destroy a transgressing nation, وَإِن كَانَتْ مُسْلِمَةً, and even if it's a Muslim nation. When there is dhulm that's committed in the streets, when there is transgression that's committed in the streets, economic corruption, economic disparity, as we see today, look, you go to the Muslim world today, I'm telling you, this applies to the entire Muslim world, I'm sure, or the majority of it, not the entire Muslim world. We have a few bright spots, alhamdulillah. And look at the economic corruption. Look at the institutionalized racism in the lands of Al-Haramain. Institutionalized racism in the lands of Al-Haramain. And subhanAllah, how our priorities shift. And I mentioned this yesterday, that Imam al-Qayyim rahimahullah said, if you want to know the situation of the Muslims, then you look at the state of the harams, of all three of the holy places. And you will understand the situation of the Muslims. And this is true in any time, in any period of history. And subhanAllah, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz rahimahullah ta'ala, he actually stopped the practice of dressing the Kaaba every single year and changing its cloth, because he said that hungry, poor people are more deserving of being clothed and fed than the Kaaba. Because Rasulullah ﷺ said that the honor of the Muslim is more sacred than the Kaaba. Look at the priorities. Look at how things have shifted now. Behind that massive clock tower in those 5-star hotels where we stay in when we go to Hajj, people that are mutilated in absolute poverty. We have to change that about ourselves. And dear brothers and sisters, if you commit dhulm on a minor level, you are contributing to the dhulm that's being committed against the ummah on a global level. If you are a zalim, if you're a transgressor in your home, in your business, you are contributing to that. Because we're all in this together. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the entire ummah suffers bima kasabat aydiyan nas, because of what man's hands have earned. You know, it always bothers me, wallahi. If, people, I'll see people that even will have, liquor stores and have a big Palestinian flag on top of the liquor. I guarantee you, your Budweiser is doing a lot more harm than the Palestinian flag on top of it. I don't care if you have a Free Syria flag up there or a Palestinian flag. You're selling alcohol. You're committing dhulm. These are dhunub. This is corruption, and it affects the entire ummah. And subhanAllah, it goes from one part to another. The dhunub of a people, the sins of a people, lead to that absolute low that Bani Israel reached. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about them, how can these people reach a level where they became so disbelieving that they killed their prophets? Why did they do that? Because of their sins, because they didn't want to abandon the things in their lives that were against the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that were against the sharia of Allah. So you know what? We're sick of being told that we're doing something wrong by the authority. Let's kill the authority. It wasn't personal hatred. Let's remove the authority. Why was Yahya alayhi salam killed? Because of a fatwa. Because he said that the king can't marry his niece. You know what? If the religious authority is not going to give us exactly what we want, we will remove the religious authority. We will get them out of the way. And you know what? I tell you right now, if you look at the Muslim world today, if you look at the Arab world today, and you look at the priorities of the people, you really think that they're ready for Islam as a whole? As a Muslim world, you really think so? Subhanallah, it's ironic, right? I was talking about optimism yesterday. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. This really broke my heart because it reminded me of a hadith. And subhanAllah, do you know what the largest gathering in Palestine was over the last 11 years? When Muhammad Assaf, the winner of Arab Idol, returned home. It was larger than any protest. The people in the streets in the West Bank, in Al-Dhaf al-Gharabiya, actually outnumbered the protest whenever Gaza was being bombarded, when the winner of Arab Idol returned home. And Rasulullah ﷺ said that there will come a time when the people will make halal al-ma'azif, al-harir, wal-khamr, that they would make halal musical instruments, silk, and alcohol and liquor. And when that time comes, and subhanAllah, you can just watch, and I was so disgusted. I saw this episode of Arab Idol. It looked exactly like American Idol. You talk about following people into a lizard's hole, as the Prophet ﷺ said. Scantily clad women, the whole 9 yards. The whole 9 yards. And people celebrate that stuff in the Muslim world. People celebrate that stuff in the Muslim world. And you know what? You go there and you try to tell them there's something wrong with that. Oh, you're just an extremist. I had, subhanAllah, close friends of mine. And this is why I say that when they, close friends of mine that walked in the streets of Egypt after this military coup. And because they had beards, were called out, Ikhwani, Ikhwani, and they don't even belong to Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood, and were beaten in the streets by people who said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. By people that would listen to Quran in their cars. Because he has a beard and he's walking in the street. You know what that shows you? The power of media. And this is the sihr of Fir'aun. The magic of Fir'aun today is the media. I was in Hajj and subhanAllah, I was trying to get the timings for the Haram, so I was going to turn on the channel that shows what's going on in the Haram and the awqat, the times of Salah in the Haram, and I accidentally came across Egyptian state TV. Oh my God. Wow. I was like, no wonder why these people are so brainwashed. Like, you have a clip of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi talking with this romantic music in the background, and then it cuts to people throwing burning tires in the streets and they're calling them terrorists. That's pretty powerful stuff. This is what media does to people. And people have organically been turned into Islamophobes in a Muslim country, in the Muslim world, just like Bangladesh and many other parts in the Muslim world. And dear brothers and sisters, I'll tell you what the optimism is now, because I have a lot of pessimistic things to say about the Muslim world right now. But here's the optimism. Dr. Ovamir used the word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used, and that word is at-tamhis. At-tamhis, which is purification. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through tests and trials, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings out the best in a people and the worst in a people. Amongst the scholars, amongst the leaders, amongst the people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purifies them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings about this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows the scum, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows the gold. It is in times of fitna that you have a person like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah ta'ala shine as he shined, and a person like Ali Jum'ah humiliated the way that he's been humiliated. And these are unprecedented times. You know why? Because I talked about this yesterday, social media. This is the only time that, who would have thought that we would be looking at a situation where the imams of the haram are tweeting against each other? That's pretty crazy. Where Sheikh Sudais gives a Saudi policy speech as the khutbah in the Kaaba, and Sheikh Shuraim tweets against him. Who would have thought we'd be seeing those times? But subhanAllah, this is an absolute purification. This is an absolute purification. And through this, the best of people shine and the worst of people are exposed. The people that are willing to struggle for this deen shine. And the people that are blinded by their wealth and their greed are humiliated. And so inshallah ta'ala, there is khair in this. And what I would leave you guys with is I want you to do me a favor, and I want you to just go and check out, there's these videos that Sheikh Salman al-Auda, who subhanAllah is a alim who is a amil at the same time, a scholar who's an activist, and we have very few of them today unfortunately. A scholar who's an activist has been making these 5-minute clips countering injustice in the Muslim world, countering racism, discrimination, Very powerful videos, and you can search them from Sheikh Salman al-Auda, and he's doing exactly what I said yesterday that the Prophet ﷺ did for 3 years before Fatah Mecca, breaking the idols in people's hearts before they are broken physically. There needs to be a shift in the priorities and the understanding of the people in the Muslim world and in our communities. When we eradicate injustice amongst ourselves, desires amongst ourselves, sins amongst ourselves, then inshallah ta'ala we can enjoin others with righteousness and forbid evil amongst others. And we hope that then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send to us victory and nusra. I apologize for going over my time. I apologize to you, Brother Ijaz in particular. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallahu khairan, Sheikh Omar Suleiman. I'm sorry that I messed up with your title. He is Sheikh, not Doctor. He is Sheikh. So with this, inshallah, concludes the program. We have a 5 minutes break, and next session will start after 5 minutes, inshallah. Jazakallahu khairan for attending and listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.